Water becomes unsafe when there's way too much of it. And to understand what happens when we get an awful lot of water, you have to understand a concept of a drainage basin. When rain hits the ground, it enters a drainage basin. Much like this basin right here. If I laid it flat on a table and I poured some water inside, all the water that fell within this part of the basin would wind up in this tub. If any water fell on the other side of this wall, it would wind up on the table or on the floor or somewhere else. The United States can be divided up into many different types of drainage basins. Here's just one example of a map of the major river basins of the United States. It's a little bit hard to understand, so let's zoom in on Pennsylvania. The most predominant color on this map is yellow, and any raindrop that falls within that yellow color will eventually wind up in the Chesapeake Bay. If you're ever coming home from Philadelphia or New Jersey and you're driving on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you might have noticed this sign on the side of the road. It says you're entering the Chesapeake Bay watershed. That's the spot where as soon as you pass that sign, any water that falls in the ground will wind up in the Chesapeake Bay. Now you can break that down into even smaller drainage basins for smaller rivers, and they've done that here on this map. But the yellow is different from the green. Any raindrop that falls in the green area will flow to the Delaware Bay. The same thing happens as we head out west. Every raindrop that falls in that area marked in red will eventually flow into the Ohio River and down to the Gulf of Mexico. Rain that falls in the dark blue will end up in Lake Erie, and anywhere in the light blue will end up in Lake Ontario on its way to the St. Lawrence River and the North Atlantic. So right there in the central part of northern Pennsylvania, there's a spot. There's a spot where three drainage basins meet. At that spot, you can stand and spit one direction, and your spit will go to the Great Lakes. Turn your head to the right and spit, and it goes to the Atlantic Ocean. And turn your head to the left and spit, and it heads to the Ohio River. Here's a sign marking that hill in the background where that shrine divine meets. So you don't need rain over a specific river in order to cause it to flood. You can have rain anywhere within the drainage basin that might cause that major river to rise. When it happens very, very quickly, and sometimes unexpectedly, that's known as a flash flood. Flash flooding kills about 89 Americans every year, and it's a flood that happens very quickly. It can happen here in Pennsylvania, but the video footage you're seeing happens out in the west, areas where it's very dry. There's no storm or rain occurring right here at this spot, but enough water has fallen in the drainage basin that as it's flowing downhill, it's going to cause a flash flood. Imagine what it would be like if you were hiking in that canyon and all of a sudden the water came down like that and started to fill up the canyon very quickly. It could be very dangerous. Notice the sun is out, shining on the mountain in the background. But here comes a tiny little wall of water. This is the start of the flash flood. A little farther downstream. And eventually these little floods can turn into a large torrent of water.
This is huge.
Look how fast that water is moving. You would not be able to stand in that water. It would easily sweep you away. It's sweeping away a lot of dirt. That's why it's so brown in this case. It can even sweep away parts of the road or the riverbanks. So this type of event could be very, very dangerous. And you might not have any idea that this water is headed your way. The National Weather Service, one of their primary jobs is to look out for dangerous weather and to try to protect us. In order to protect us, there are different ways they try to communicate the amount of risk we are immediately facing. What you see on the screen is their current proposed model for how they interact with the public in the days of social media. If there's any kind of legitimate threat in the future, they'll start off with what they call the outlook stage. And they'll just make people aware, hey, the conditions are right. We could get a lot of rain or snow or maybe even storms at a specific time in the future. With growing confidence and accuracy and certainty in their forecast, they would then move to the alert stage, where they would write a specific special weather statement to just make people aware that dangerous weather is possible. Once it becomes more imminent, within about a day, we could go to a watch stage, and then as it's happening, a warning stage. The watch stage comes before the warning stage. The watch means watch out, conditions are right, and warning means usually that it's happening. And that's the case here with floods. To protect you from floods, there could be a flash flood watch or a flash flood warning. All watches say that flooding could happen. Everything is ready to flood. It doesn't have to be exactly where you are. It could be somewhere else within the drainage basin. But if you're by some substantial water, the water levels could rise quickly. Once the water levels rise and they see that a flood is occurring, then they issue a flash flood warning. Warnings mean take action immediately. Sometimes, instead of a flash flood warning, which is a flood that comes without surprise, you might see a flood warning for a very specific creek or a very specific river. This is usually issued when they have an idea that a lot of water is entering a river, and over a long period of time, those floodwaters would slowly come up. Now, part of staying safe is understanding how floods can kill you. And most people who die in floods die. True. There's more to that. They die in the car. A lot of people feel invulnerable inside their cars, where their cars can literally become death traps. Very little water can displace a lot of weight, so air in the tires can lift a car up very easily. This is actually a photograph from a movie here on CBS that was taken of a car caught in flash flood waters. Now, no video that I'm going to show you in this class is going to show you people getting killed. These people miraculously lived. There is a mother in this car who made a stupid decision trying to drive through floodwaters. But it's not the mother I'm most concerned about, it's the two young children that are in the back seat. She is so lucky that the car did not flip over, and she is so lucky that this car eventually gets stuck on a bridge right there. And people ran out to the bridge to rescue the woman and her children. Most people who die in flash floods die in their cars or outside. Here's another situation from Texas. This car tried to cross the road and it was swept away. Just because it's a larger vehicle or an SUV does not mean it's safe. All those people there have no way to rescue the people trapped inside. Imagine how horrifying that must feel. Typically, what happens with these vehicles is they very easily can flip over like this. Now, those people inside thankfully did get out at a later point. They were not killed, but it was a horrifying, horrifying event. In 2015, there were 155 deaths in the United States caused by flooding. That's above the usual average. 113 of them died inside their cars or walking. That's almost 3/4. 72% of those deaths were preventable with a simple, educated decision not to get their car in the flood's path. And the news was no better in 2016. And thankfully, none in Pennsylvania. But we have had bad years in the past. 2011 was the last one, with 113 flooding deaths in the United States, 94 of them, or 83%, in cars or walking. Most in Arkansas, but they had 16 in Pennsylvania. Of those 16 deaths in Pennsylvania, 2 died inside, 14 were in their vehicle or walking from their vehicle. Here in Pennsylvania, flash floods primarily come from very strong thunderstorms that go over the same area over and over and over again. We call this training in meteorology. Just like a train goes down the same set of tracks that doesn't move, storms that constantly develop over the same area and dump hours and hours of heavy rain can cause flash flooding very quickly. You can see this on this radar map just north of New York City. The green box that pops up in the middle of the loop there is the flash flood warning for those heavy rains that were falling. So in order to stay safe, it's really quite simple. If you live in an area that's prone to flash flooding, that's very close to a creek that frequently floods, when there's a flash flood watch, it's time to go somewhere else, get to higher ground. But no matter what, if you encounter any kind of high water on the road, don't drive across the water. It's just not safe to drive in there. It doesn't matter how many cars go before you. If you go into that water, you're increasing the chance that that will kill you. The only time you should drive across the water is if you can see the road. Up in the Lehigh Valley, when I was a meteorologist, there was a situation where we had a hill that went down into a little valley, and there was a car on the road. There's my car. I know, it's not wonderful. There was also a rather large car on this side of the road that was driving out of that valley. And what was happening was, right in the middle here, there was a flood. So this car saw this car successfully drive through the floodwater, and it thought, I can go ahead and follow. Not realizing that as this car moved through the floodwater, a sinkhole developed here in the road. A sinkhole is when there's some kind of cave or weathered out area underneath the road and the cave roof collapses. So now the road looks something like this. And this car couldn't see it. So this car drove into the floodwater and then went down into the sinkhole. Once they were in the sinkhole, they couldn't open their doors. They couldn't bash the glass to get out, and they eventually drowned. This is primary reason number 1 why you don't want to drive in the floodwaters. Reason number 2 is the water, if it's moving fast enough, can quickly sweep you away. Fast water up to your ankles can sweep you away as a walker. So what happens if you drive into the water and it floods your engine and your car stalls? Now it's going to be difficult for you to get out and walk to safety. And if that's not enough to keep you out of the water, remember that floodwaters cause septic tanks to overflow. Septic tanks. Those are those big tanks underground that hold the poop that you flush out of the toilet. Well, when water levels rise, the septic tanks flood, and all the stuff in the septic tank ends up in the floodwater. You know, before I go on the air sometimes at the TV station, they'll do a weather story or weather bump into me. They'll show a story of some place around the world where there's flooding occurring. And they usually always get video of someone riding their bike in the flood or swimming in the floodwaters. And all I can think is, that's gross. If that keeps you out of the floodwater, though, more power to you. Stay out of floodwaters. Never drive into floods. Haven't made my point yet? Let me show you some videos to prove it further. This was some B-roll being filmed by a reporter in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. This person was not paying attention, and they drove right into the floodwaters. Now, the reporter isn't exactly doing the smart thing and trying to save him. Yes, it's smart to try to save him, but you try to throw an object at him first. He just dove right in. Eventually, this passenger was pulled to safety. He'd probably turn off his windshield wipers now. When asked why he did it, he said he didn't even see the water on the road. You hear that thunder? It's not raining here, but it's raining upstream. And look how quickly these flood waters cover the road. And it's not clear water either. It's full of mud, bits of tree. So sure, you might be able to stand there in that flood water, but can you take a tree hitting you at 20 miles an hour? Probably not. That's why the National Weather Service is using this expression, turn around, don't drown. It's easy to underestimate the depth and force of floodwaters, and they can also conceal sinkhole damage to the road, as in this picture. Look at the one on the left and the one on the right. That's the same location. Never cross the floodwaters if you can't see the road. Turn around, don't drown. Which leads to one of my favorite videos from Hungary. This lady was driving down the street through the floodwater and got into a little bit of trouble. Right into a sinkhole. People are yelling at her. Eventually they get her out. Pushing's not going to do the trick. But did she learn her lesson? No, she didn't. Back in 2011, we had a massive rainstorm here at the Susquehanna Valley. These are pictures from Swidera Township. Shame on the SUV that's driving through the water, but look in the background. Look at that gray car turning around. Very good job. Give that person a prize. This is Hershey Park. The water was so high at Zoo America that the bison had to be shot and put down because they just weren't going to survive the rising water and they couldn't get them out of the pen. This is Interstate 83 over Sherman's Creek. Those people are trapped on that highway with water lapping up very close to the side of the road. Here's some people trapped in Hershey on their cars. Notice the tractor trailer and the dumpster in the background that's been picked up by the water. And the tow truck that's been basically covered to the top. And this was a house just down the street from where I lived in West Hempfield Township. It's a Mount Joy address. These people were told to evacuate 3 times. Please get out of your house, the water is rising. And they refused to evacuate. Eventually, they called the emergency medical personnel and they had to come and be rescued at taxpayer expense. Right down the street from them was a covered bridge that was lifted off its moorings and carried downstream. The great 2011 flood here in Pennsylvania dumped 15 inches of rain in Mount Joy. That's a record for that town. 9 local deaths with 49 statewide. Just 3 short of Hurricane Agnes in the 70s, which is the leading cause of flooding death in the state. There's a minivan that got stuck and the victim got out and tried to walk away, but got swept away in Swidera Creek. An 87-year-old drowned inside a car in Swidera Creek. 2 cars got stuck and people got out in Chickies Creek and were drowned. 1 person was drowned inside their car on Route 325 in Clarks Creek. An 8-year-old boy was stuck in a storm drain in Cocalico. The EMTs were actually on the site as it happened and they still couldn't save him. There was someone in their basement in Hershey bailing the water out of their basement when the walls collapsed on them and they drowned. In Lebanon, someone was walking through floodwaters, another car lost control and hit the person. And in Cadorus Township, somebody fell down the steps of their basement, hit their head, passed out, and then drowned in the water. Most of those local deaths were all preventable if they didn't drive into floodwaters. So in order to stay safe, I hope I made my point on what you should do when you're driving and conditions could cause flooding. So if we look around the world at some places that get very little or a lot of rain, the wettest spot that's evenly distributed throughout the year is this mountain in Hawaii, where they get 460 inches of rain every year. The driest spot on Earth is the Atacama Desert in Chile. There was no known rain that fell from 1570 to 1971. That's 400 years without recorded rain. Accra in Chile gets a millimeter of rain each year, with some weather stations receiving no rain ever. 2015 did have some flooding in the southern part of the desert, though. Here in the United States, the most rain that ever fell in one day was in Alvin, Texas. 43 inches of rain fell on July 25th, 1979. There's a picture from the Houston Chronicle in someone's house. That's how quickly the water came down. The heaviest rain observed was in Holt, Missouri, where they received a foot of rain in just 42 minutes. Or consider Unionville, Maryland, where they got an inch of rain in 1 minute. The snowfall equivalent of that is 10 inches. How hard would it have to snow that you get 10 inches of snow in a minute? Well, that's what was happening with the rain. And then there's the Great Rain of Smethport, Pennsylvania, where they received 31 inches in just 4.5 hours. There's reports that hills became so waterlogged that they just ran down the hill and flattened out. A mud flow or a landslide killed some people in Smethport. Here in Lancaster at our airport, the wettest day ever was September 30th, 2010, where they got 5.5 inches of rain, 5.71 to be exact. The Mount Joy rainstorm that produced 15 inches of rain there, Lancaster City only got 4.5 inches. It's rained only twice in history on Leap Day, February 29th, and that was 1.5 inches in 2012 and a trace of rain in 2016. Before 2012, it had never rained on February 29th. Otherwise, November 18th is the driest day of our year. We've only had rain 10 times in those 70 years, the most still being under 1/10 of an inch in 1977.